Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pynakker, and I'm very excited about the guests I'm having on today. But before we get there, I just wanted to remind you all that if you want to financially support the channel, we do have links in the description for Patreon, PayPal, as well as Venmo. Of course, don't forget our merch store, MormonBookReviews.com, where you get such lovely things as this hat. Now, I don't normally talk about these things at the beginning of my episode because I don't want to make people thinking this is about money, because it's not. But I just want to I want to specifically thank people who are financially supporting the channel. It really is a great blessing, and I want to thank you so much. So I am really excited about this venture that I'm about to expand upon by introducing to you two members of a podcast slash YouTube channel that I'm going to show on the share screen in a second here. But first of all, Kai Van Leuven and Beals, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, honored.
And I am pulling up this here real quick. You have a YouTube channel, but it's also a podcast called Jesus for Mormons. And it's a very interesting thing. We're going to talk about that. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to hit the subscribe button. So, woohoo, you got 48 subscribers now, homie. And I also wanted to point out that you also have a Facebook group called Jesus for Mormons. It's a private group, but you can request to join that, and we will feature that later on in the episode as well. But there you go. Welcome to the YouTube's podcast world, Kai and Kai, what made you decide to start this thing up? And I'm going to ask you about some of your background, but maybe talk about, well, first of all, actually, let's talk about your background first. You are a former member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who converted to evangelical Christianity and decided to start a podcast called Jesus for Mormons. So I'm laying it out there for you, homie.
Yeah. So really why I wanted to start this podcast is I feel that there is the place that a lot of people go is to maybe a non-believing view of religion after they leave the Mormon church. That is, I feel, the first place that a lot of people go. It's hard to separate the beliefs of the church from a belief in God. I think that's a really hard place for people. They just say, well, I feel that the church, and I'll just say exactly how I feel, materially maybe hasn't been as truthful with me as I would have liked. And so they take the opinion that, well, maybe that is all religion. Maybe religion isn't really for, gosh, I'm trying to think of how to say this in a nice way. Maybe religion is a tool that people use to trick people. Maybe religion is that people aren't sincere. And I grew up in the Mormon church. I feel like the local church is very sincere. But I think as you go higher up in the hierarchy of the church, there is this idea of trying to protect the entity. And I think that protection leads the church to maybe not be as honest and as truthful with its members. And so I think that's really what the Mormon Stories podcast is about. That's what the CES letter is about. That's what a lot of these things are, is it saying, I don't really feel like people were that honest with me. And I think that makes people who come out of the Mormon church brush all religion with a broad brush that says, it's all not true. And that's how I felt coming out of the church. I said, man, I really want to hold on to this Christianity thing, but I don't know if I can, because I feel that I've already been hurt in a religious system. I don't know if that's a little too loaded, Steve. I'm not sure, but that's really why I wanted to start this podcast, is maybe we can hold on to some of our religious experiences that we had while in the Mormon church, and say, well, the church kind of materially probably hasn't been as honest as it could have been. It's trying to be more honest, probably right now than it's ever been. But that's not the church that I grew up in. The church that I grew up in said, well, this is all anti-Mormon lies. And so I'm trying to kind of fill that gap
Yeah,
between
yeah. I think that's
between yeah, go ahead, Steve.
no, I appreciate your perspective there, and actually, I think that this is really important because, of course, I was an atheist for many years myself, and just recently got back into faith, and went on Mormon Stories and talked about how Mormonism saved my life. So I have a very interesting relationship with the church and with the tradition. This is not an anti-Mormon program, but I think it's also really important that I have people on who've left the church to tell their story. Some have taken the atheist position, some have moved on to like Catholicism, other religions, some have gone into New Age stuff and Wicca and all this kind of stuff. And your path has taken you into evangelical Christianity. And one thing that I notice is that, a lot of people in the ex-Mormon Reddit, actually, as much as they despise the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they actually despise evangelicals even more. And I get a lot of heat for being an evangelical when I first started. Now they understand that I'm not that kind of evangelical, but I get that. And actually, that's one of the reasons I had wanted Di to come on, who's the co-host on this program, is because Di is actually a pastor of a church in Seattle that Kai had been going to, but recently has relocated. And Di, I wanted you to chime in, and I wanted to continue our conversation, Kai, but I wanted you to kind of introduce yourself, give us a little background, and then what got you tied in with this thing about Mormonism when you're an evangelical pastor.
I will keep that brief. I grew up in a home where nobody went to church. Nobody had ever gone to church. So my story of how I ended up in church is a whole other piece of it. But somewhere along the line, I gave my life to Jesus and ended up in a Bible college for my college experience. And I went for a psychology degree. So I didn't intend to follow the path I'm on now. But I did meet my husband.
I'm just curious because a lot of people in our audience may not know, what is a Bible college?
Yeah. So I went to a Christian university, and I think traditionally it might be called more of a seminary in the nation's eyes. But it was less seminary, more university with a Christian biblical worldview. And that was really helpful for me, actually. I think, the college years can be a lot of exploring and lostness, and I was certainly there. And so I appreciated a biblical worldview. I believed in God. I believed in the Bible, but how to walk that out in my everyday life was maybe what was a little bit missing. And I met my husband there at college, and I started my journey of what we call ministry, but working in a church by being a youth pastor. I was a youth pastor for a few years, ended up marrying my husband, Brandon, and then together we were youth pastors for about 12 years. And then we ended up planting a church. So together we planted Venture Church, which is where we are now.
Okay.
Our 20th birthday as a church is in just a month. And we are in the Seattle area, which, if you know anything about Western Washington or even the West Coast in general, it is generally a very non-Christian, actually non-faith region overall. There's not a lot of faith representation of any faith. And so that's a tough road, and we're up for that challenge of just being faithful, loving, good neighbors, just trying to be good people who invest in our community and a good representation of Jesus.
And how long has your church been around now, did you say?
Our 20th birthday is just in a month.
Oh, wow, 20 years. I thought you said that. Wow, that's amazing. So, and you planted a church. What does mean planted a church?
It means it did not exist. We owned zero possessions for a church. We did not have a building. And in Western Washington, that's one of the biggest challenges, is actually securing a space. Even if you find a space to rent, there's a lot of hostility towards any kind of a faith expression as the renter. So we did build a building. We actually are multi-campus, which means because of Western Washington's space constraints, we can't really have any campus that is super large because of landlockedness. So we have campuses in multiple cities. So we have 5 other campuses besides our main campus.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's okay. That's pretty remarkable. So now you we're talking off camera that you actually one of your earlier exposures to Mormonism was you grew up with a friend that was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Maybe talk a little bit about that as part of your background.
Yeah, one of my closest friends growing up was from a family that were very committed Mormons. They were very good people. They had good, strong values. I didn't come from a church background, so I didn't really know any different. But I think my parents appreciated that I was friends with a family with such good values. And she and I, eventually I ended up in church, a Christian church, gave my life to Jesus. And so her and I had a lot of very frank conversations. Neither of us are big arguers. We really wanted to understand each other and understand where our beliefs differed and where our common ground was. And I think that was really healthy. I think I still try to embrace conversations with people who have differing views than mine just to try and understand where they're coming from. And yeah, so she was a great asset to me, dear friend. She was in my wedding. I was not in hers because she is a Temple Mormon.
Right, right. Yeah. And just really just curious, because this is part of your faith journey, was there ever a time where you were maybe even considering joining that church?
No.
No. Okay. Great. Good to know. So Kai, let's get back you into the conversation here. So here you are. You are a uh you talk about why you started one of the reasons why you started a podcast. But before we get there, I also want to just talk a little bit about your background. What kind of Mormon were you? Did you serve a mission? All that good stuff. Give us your credentials.
Yeah, I would say that I was a rank and file member of the church. I did all of those ritualistic things. At 8 years old, I was baptized. I was in every deacons, teachers, priest quorum presidency. Um, I went on a mission. I went to the Missouri St. Louis mission, which is which serves Illinois and Missouri. Did 2 years of that. I actually, before the mission, I baptized my wife, and she waited for 2 years, and we got married 2 weeks after I got home from that. Um, and we're still married today. I don't. We're at 14 years, 15 years of marriage. So yeah, served actively in the church. I was a seminary teacher at one point. So I served every day. I taught our juniors and seniors, early morning seminary. I did that. Been in multiple elders quorum presidencies. I was the gospel doctrine teacher, which is teaching all the adults. Uh, Gosh,
And
yeah, I've had
Kai, your
all those colleagues.
pedigree, you gotta give your Mormon pedigree too.
I was just
So,
gonna ask that.
so,
Were
so,
you born in the covenant, Kai?
oh, I was born of goodly parents. I was born in the covenant. So there you go.
There you go.
Steve, you know what I like? You're getting all my references that I've been dropping on my podcast. And Di's like, what are you talking about?
Yep.
But yeah, born of goodly parents, right?
Mhm.
Born in the covenant. My yeah, I was very active. So I was not just a fair weather on and off Christmas and Easter or whatever. I was there every Sunday in the ward, being an active participant. I was wearing garments even months and months after I left the church because I didn't really know culturally how to adapt to a different lifestyle. Um, I just I was just a fully active believing person. My parents are very active. My parents were temple workers for a long time until my dad's health maybe hasn't been so good lately, and so he stopped. Um, but yeah, just a rank and file, hardcore, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We could call it Mormon back then, but
Yes.
we could say we were Mormon. Um, but so I just think that, I'm not just somebody who started. Now, Di wants me to talk about my pedigree.
Yes.
So Emily Dow Partridge, right, which you probably know, Steve, is my four-time great grandmother. Okay, so you probably know she was married to Joseph. Joseph died, was martyred or killed, however you want to look at it, and then remarried Brigham Young, had kids by Brigham Young, And then that's where my family line comes through, as Emily Dow Partridge. So, we've been in the church for a long, long, long time. That's on my dad's side. On my mom's side, it's like Jose Stout, Harold B. Lee, like, all of that. That's another side of my family. So I have deep, deep Mormon roots that go back, generation and, upon generation.
Yeah, so that's the pedigree. And so often I know that's really important to a lot of people in that faith tradition as well. So you're not somebody who you were steeped in it. It was part of you. In many ways, Kai, you still are a Mormon. You'll always be a Mormon in that sense, culturally. And so I guess before we talk more about the podcast, I just want to know, you kind of alluded to it, but what was some of the things that happened to you that caused you that decided to actually leave the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Yeah, so really what happened was like I said, I was full on believing. This was not a slow burn. This was a very fast fall out of the church. And it's funny, I work really long hours for my job, and this was the first time I lived away from my family. So I was remodeling a storage facility. I buy real estate, renovate it. That's my profession. And this time I decided to live on site. And shockingly, you have a lot of free time, even if you're working 12 or 14-hour days, to just kind of unwind when you're not a parent, when you don't have kids running around. You actually have a fair amount of time. And so I remember I was studying my lessons. At the time I was a Sunday school teacher to the high school kids in my ward. So I was the Sunday school teacher with another great guy, the co-teacher with me, great human. So I'm studying my lesson for that, and then I was in the LDS Tools app, just reading other random things, just going through, and I'm reading through something, and I read it and I said, "Gosh, I just don't fundamentally agree with that." And then I started to research it more and stay within the LDS tools, right? Stay on what is now the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints website, stay within the LDS tools. And then you start to dig a little bit deeper. And I think you start to go a little bit into the gray of the Mormon theology, which is apologetics. And I think that's really when I started to lose my faith, was when I was reading over kind of these responses to the problems in the church. And those are not isolated. It's not like, oh, you have a problem with this. Let's just say Joseph Smith polygamy. Um, you don't just click on one problem. There's actually multiple problems on a page. And so I remember being like, oh, I didn't know this, and I didn't know this, and I didn't know this. And so there was this shift where you start to really dig into like a lot of different subjects that you weren't even originally intending to find out about. And
Now, were you looking at the gospel topics essays? Tell me some of the materials you're looking at.
yeah, I was looking at old quotes that I had read. Gospel topics essays were huge, mostly because they confirmed what what I was always told in my life, the anti-Mormon stuff. It started to confirm all of those rumors that you hear growing up. And I think that's what was the most concerning for me, is I would bring up problems like in my local ward. I would bring up like, hey, I heard this. And my bishop or my young men's leader would be like, no, that's not true. That's anti-Mormon. And then to read it on the gospel topics essays, you're just like, what? Like, what? How does
Would this be like an example, like the seer stone, just different things like that? Give me examples that you were coming across that was kind of, causing you to have some questions here.
Well, reading about Emily Dow Partridge, my four-time great grandmother, and her sealing to Joseph Smith, and then having a second sealing that his wife could see. That was really problematic for me. It just showed a lack of honesty, I felt like. It's it's not the way that polygamy, listen, polygamy to me, it may not be this way for a lot of your viewers. It may not be this way for you, Steve. Polygamy for me is weird. Okay. And the way that it was pitched to me growing up in the church is these were consenting people. Everyone knew what was going on. Everyone in the church knew what was going on. All of these things, right? So it had this very consensual view. And so to hear that the prophet of the church's wife did not know what was going on, to me was really concerning. To me was like, this isn't consensual people, bringing on another wife. This is deception. This is, as I would view it, adultery. And I'm not going to back down from that. Like that's how I view these extramarital affairs. And so I started to look into that. The book of Abraham is like, I mean, once you've kind of already taken apart other things, it's just kind of like, okay, yeah. I mean, it all kind of makes sense in the story. The seer stone to me, just the way it was pitched to me. I mean, I can still visualize the picture of Joseph Smith looking over the plates and turning the pages, right? Them not sitting in a cloth and him putting his head in a hat and looking through a stone, right? We all know what that visual looks like. We all know what the way that the church has depicted it. And now that they're kind of being, now with the movement of information through the internet, the way that they're depicting it now and having Russell Nelson kind of show what that looks like in a video, that was never the church that I grew up in. That's a later addition to try to make sense of its real history and to try to rewrite history to have it more palatable for people who are just finding out the truth.
So I wanted to ask, you said that you were going in the LDS Tools app, and what was the first thing that you saw that was like, because people often say that when their shelf breaks, it's often the first thing they encounter, the original thing they encountered, that ultimately is what that breaks their shelf. What was that process like, or what was it that was the first thing that kind of made you kind of reconsider everything?
I would say Joseph Smith's polygamy.
Okay. And that's what ultimately it sounds to me that that's what was one of the main reasons you left the church.
I would say so. And I knew about Joseph Smith's polygamy, but I didn't know the way that it was practiced.
Mm.
And
We
I didn't
actually have
know.
we
Go
have an
ahead.
episode about that on our podcast where Kai breaks down talking about imagining what it was like for Emily and her background and her part in the family and how she was brought in as a wife. I think that was what you conveyed to me, even how heartbreaking that was for you.
Yeah, and I think Steve, you're probably familiar with the Year of Polygamy podcast. They did a special on Emily Dow Partridge, and where they read her journal extensively. And I'm like, you listen to it and you're like, this lady did not have a great life. Like, she was faithful because she didn't have all the information that we have now. Like me growing up if I was born the same year as Russell M. Nelson, I probably wouldn't be alive. But if I were born the same year as him, I would have lived my whole life as a fully believing, active member of the church. It's only in light of the information that is readily available to us that I left. Right? I'm just a product of my time and being able to look over all the information and come to my own conclusions on that.
Yeah, I often think that, so often people were critical of the Tanners, accusing them of being anti-Mormon. And this is one thing I've told Sandra a couple of times. I mentioned this to her, and I said, all the Tanners did was they published the Gospel Topics essays 50 years before the church did. And so in many ways, a lot of this information was available, but pre-internet, it was very difficult to get out. And so that's a very, and then finally, when the internet does become dominant, the church then felt like we need to do something to address these issues. And that's when they did the gospel topics essays. What I find fascinating is in the back here, I got the first edition, the first Saints volume of the Saints series. And I remember I was flying back from Utah for a conference, and I was seated next to a Southwest Airlines pilot who was sitting in the back seat with me, and in the back, far back row. And we started talking. He's a pilot. He lives in Idaho, through and through Mormon, just believed the whole thing. And then COVID happened, and he had a lot of free time, so he decided, well, I'm going to start reading some church history. So he picks up his first edition of the Saints volume. He read it, and that was enough to cause him to leave the church. And this is the Faithful, published by the church. So for a lot of people, their knowledge of the history of the church was so minimal that even something like a volume that's published by the church caused him to leave, which I found really fascinating. And folks, I'm just being descriptive, not prescriptive. This is my experience that I've been having with a lot of people. And I tell people, there's somebody right now, there's a Latter-day Saint right now who's a firm TBM all the way, all in 2 weeks from now is going to become an atheist. I mean, that's how quickly this process often happens. So this is real. Everybody knows this story is very similar. Everybody has family members now that have left, or friends. 20, 25 years ago, this was unheard of, but now this is the reality of the situation. Of course, we're experiencing the same thing happening in the evangelical church too. Many of our youth are leaving. We're seeing a lot of people leaving the evangelical church too. So I want to acknowledge that this isn't just something about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Akai, I actually, now that we're kind of fleshing this story out a little bit, I don't know, what years were this? How old were you, and what years were this when this was happening?
Okay, so this would have been when I'm 33.
Okay.
And I know I'm being put on the record. I think it's on 2021,
Okay.
2020. During COVID, we stopped going to church because we
Yep.
had to. So I'm blessing the sacrament in my home. I'm giving it to my family, running church within our house. Um, you know, I don't know. I think I can be mischaracterized as being anti-Mormon and someone who's just looking to hurt the church. But I would throw this out there. What path do people have who leave the church? What path do they have to faith outside of the Mormon church?
Yeah,
What
where
does
would
that
you go?
path look like? What's that?
Where would you go? Right?
Yeah, where else are you gonna go? And
Yeah.
what biases do you have that make you say, I'm gonna go nowhere? And I think that's important for people to really think about that. Like, do you have any like, is there anything within the church that has made you say, well, I'm gonna go nowhere? And if you look at the large pool of people who are leaving the church, finding faith outside of the church is not the direct path that they go to. They go to being very cynical. I mean, you've been on the ex-Mormon subreddit. By the way, it's very funny. And I I go on there and laugh and I have fun with it. And I love to just, have fun and be light. But at the same time, like, people who leave the church, there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. And where are they going to go to find actual like healing and move on? I believe that that's through Jesus. Okay. And I'm not going to be apologetic. I'm not going to apologize about that. Like, I believe you too, Steve. Yes. Steve, as he's wearing his Jesus shirt, he believes that as well. But I believe that people can heal through Jesus. Like, this process of leaving the church, and I didn't leave in a real happy, oh, everything's good in my life. I left and I was terribly depressed. I left and I had nowhere to go. I walked out of my bishop's office and felt awful. But I knew that I couldn't stay in an organization that at the very foundation I felt wasn't honest. Like, and that's just a core belief. That's something that that's kind of the hill that I'll die on, is I can't stay in an organization that I don't feel is being honest with me. Um, so anyways, I would ask the people listening, if you have people that you love in your life who have not been able to accept church history as it's come out in the gospel topics essays, where should those people go? And they will never accept the church's narrative again because they feel that they've been lied to. Where are those people supposed to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you, because actually over the well, and again, actually, the reason why I asked you about the time when you were doing is I had we hadn't talked about this before, but I had a feeling we're going to talk about around COVID times, because that seems to have changed a lot of people's trajectory in their faith journey immensely. Whether it was President Nelson getting imploring people to get the vaccine, all those kind of things caused people to kind of have their shelf get a little heavy and even question the brethren. This is a fact, folks. I mean, we all know this to be the case. And so this is the reality, is that the things fundamentally changed and flipped in the church during the whole COVID situation. And it's interesting to see a very similar thing happening with the Jehovah's Witness religion too, because I keep close tabs on what's going on in that group as well. They're experiencing similar things happening. So yes, this is the thing. Your story is a story I've heard many, many times. It's very similar. And I also say that, one of the things that I get really that hurts me is that the people who have left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will not even look towards the evangelical path. And I think partly because of some of the bad actors in the evangelical community, the people that stand out in front of the temple dedications and they're holding up the temple garments, mocking the Mormons, whether it's at a temple dedication or general conference. And I always tell people, these Latter-day Saints that are walking by as they're going into their sacred space are seeing those people making fun of them and saying, well, if I leave my church, I certainly wouldn't join their church. And I think that's really important, that evangelicals be Christ-like in how we engage Latter-day Saints, because when they see that, they don't want to be that. They don't want to become that. And that's what they think we are. And I want to say we aren't all that way, but there are people that kind of give us a bad name. Dee, do you want to speak to that?
I 100% agree. It makes me sad. I don't think it's helpful. I feel like my role as walking beside Kai when he shares the hardest parts of his story or the parts that have caused him the most pain or grief, I find myself apologizing a lot. And not because I individually did something, but because somebody that Kai looked to as a religious authority or a religious leader or a trusted person of faith, however you want to define them, led them astray. And I agree, there are many in the Mormon church and there are many in the evangelical world that are maybe not ill-intended, but when someone is led astray, and I think the most powerful thing we can do is apologize and say, I'm so sorry. And so to anyone out there watching who is offended by the way an evangelical Christian is behaving, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. So Kai, you're going through depression and you're going through all this stuff, and then how does your path end up going into the evangelical world? Talk about that.
Yeah, so my wife wanted to transition from Mormonism to Christianity. That was her thing. I would say, gosh, I don't want to lay life because she'll probably listen to this, but I would say that she was a little more on the PMO side, physically in and mentally out, throughout her time in the Mormon church. And so COVID was that break for her, right? Where she
And
said,
just real quick, you also said that you had actually baptized her. So was she a convert? And what
I,
was her faith tradition before that?
yeah, so she was a convert. She was Episcopal. She grew
Okay.
up Episcopal. And then they stopped going in her teenage years. So maybe they would go really sporadically. Um, but yeah, she grew up Episcopal. And then I baptized her at 17. And I think she was fair weather. This is what I will say about my wife. My wife went to church with me every single Sunday for over a decade. We paid tithing to the church, and she was okay with that. We were full on believing members. We held down callings. We did all those things. So my wife was, I think she really tried to make it work. But it just didn't work for her. She just never felt connected to God within the Mormon church. And so during COVID, the Mormon church is closed down. Sorry, I'm going to call it that, friends. I could call it the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but okay. So the Mormon church is closed down, and we're still having, our sacrament meeting at home. I'm blessing the sacrament, right? Reading Moroni 4 and 5 and DNC 20. Come on. I'm reading these to my family. We are, doing these rituals, and I'm having a lesson every week. Easter rolls around, and my wife says, "Hey, ready to go to an actual church. Your church is not open, but on Easter, our family should be going to a church," right? So she's speaking to my sensibilities, and I'm like, oh, that kind of makes sense, right? For us to go to a church. So we end up going to Dye's church, Venture Church in Seattle. We end up going there, and I'll just tell you, I was not having any of it. And I've already apologized to Dye off screen, through multiple, but it just wasn't. It is so incredibly different, right? I mean, it is a charismatic church. It is loud. People are having fun. It's very light. I looked up at her husband up on stage. He has tattoos. I'm thinking to myself, what did I find myself in? What world am I in here? So it's a totally different atmosphere. And I'm still in garments. I'm still full on believing. I'm kind of, I have, come on, all you Mormon people out there, I have my arms crossed the whole time, right?
Oh, that's not just Mormon, not just Mormon.
Okay. I guess you look at your whole congregation and say, oh, there's a lot of people with their arms crossed. Anyways, maybe not. It's a very charismatic, awesome church. Anyways, but I didn't feel that way at the time. I'm there just watching what's happening. And my wife had a total move of God moment, was saved in that church that Sunday. And that started to create this huge division in my family. And I think that people who listen to this will say, oh, see, there it is. He's taken the easy way out. And you can do that. You can throw those stones at me. You can say, wow, his wife decided, and he didn't want to be a part member family. Okay. I will receive that criticism. But at the same time, when a situation like that happens where your family is going to be split, I think you should be able to look underneath the hood of your faith, and it should be able to stand up. That's how I feel. And the people who are saying, wow, you didn't go this faithful perspective, I researched and I studied and I tried to confirm everything that the church told me, and it didn't stand up. So my family is kind of going this one direction, and then I became very agnostic and atheist after kind of discovering all these things about the church, very negative towards God. I even hate, like, mentally to bring this up because it takes me to a really sad and dark time in my life where I was very angry and resentful. And even the good things, even the good things that I experienced in the church, which were a lot of things, I looked at them and I was just like, oh, I just want nothing to do with my history and my upbringing, which was actually really pretty good. I just became so negative and so nihilistic at that point in my life.
Wow. So it was your wife's born again experience that kind of puts you on this trajectory. And then
I
I,
think I wouldn't characterize it that way. I would
okay,
say that created a divide in
that
our
created the vibe.
family.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I researched the church, you know, as I was just researching the church, I started to kind of look at some issues more. I started to look at them more critically and read the CES letter and really started to, go down that path of deconstructing my faith.
Okay. So there's a lot of people in the ex-Mormon community that are tracking with your story right now. Now, not too often does somebody that's on that path find their way back into faith. So I'd like to know what was it that brought you back into faith?
Um, Gosh, that's a really good question. I think that it is. I guess I'll go. It's really, really, really empty. It's really empty being not in a relationship with God. It's just really empty. And I could speak about a lot of different things and a lot of cool God moments that happened in my life, but I felt so empty. I don't know how else to say it. And I'm trying to fill it with all of these different things. I'm a big wrestling guy. It wouldn't be a podcast that I'm on without talking about wrestling. I tried to fill that with coaching. I tried to say, hey, I'm going to pour all my time into this God replacement. And wrestling will become my God, and I will train kids to be good. I don't think I'm that good of a coach, but that was my focus. I started to change my focus to I'm going to be a great wrestling coach, or I'm going to be a great investor. I'm going to be great at my business. I'm going to be great at this thing. And I tried to fill that emptiness that I didn't have or that I had by ditching God and by wanting nothing to do with religion. I tried to fill that with a lot of different things. And those things ended up letting me down. Those things ended up not helping me at all. And me feeling very empty. And I started, this whole time, I believe that families should go to church together. I think that that's a good thing for families to do. I'm going to Di's church. It's not, you know, her and her husband have a church, Venture Church in Mill Creek. And I was going to their church. And this whole time, I'm listening to them preach. And I would say, in retrospect, looking back, the spirit was moving within me. But I just wanted to discount that and say, this is my own, you know, as they call it on the Mormon Stories podcast, my elevated emotion, right? I don't want to receive whatever is happening in this experience. And so I continued to push God away and push God away. Um, my son decided to get baptized in the evangelical church. So I had been pushing him for years, right? And he turned 8. So he's like, "Well, Dad, when am I going to get baptized?" And I just left the Mormon church. I tried to really discourage him from getting baptized in general. But he really wanted to do it. And so I said, "Okay, that's fine. But if you're going to get baptized in a church, you need to actually know what you believe, right? Like you need to learn your theology." And so me and him started to actually read the Bible cover to cover. And and we're not talking about like a kid's 300-page Bible. We read a 1,400-page Bible, me and him, cover to cover. We started in Genesis. We worked our way all the way and by the time we hit the end of the Old Testament, whatever, 800 pages in, I don't know the exact number, I was like, I think I like actually I'm starting to believe this again. And then we started on the New Testament and I was just like, wow, like I really want to be back in a relationship with God. I really want to be in a relationship with Jesus again. And that hasn't been, I didn't get saved and felt like, oh, all of that resentment that I had went away. I don't feel that way. And I'm still working through a lot of the resentment that I have towards the Mormon church. But I feel so much better now, and I feel so much more whole being in a relationship with Jesus than I, you know, than I have in a long time. I guess I'll just put it that way.
So I just want to know, how long ago was this that this happened?
So it was about, I was about a year of atheist agnostic Kai, negative, anti-religion,
Arms
arms
crossed, Kai.
crossed. I did a podcast about when I met with Dai's husband and how I pretty much told him I thought that he was a terrible person. Um,
I believe that podcast is called Why I Didn't Like Brandon.
well, I actually said why I hated Brandon.
Oh, okay. Fair.
Why I hated the main pastor of this church. Um, and yeah, I went into this just very, very negative towards religion and wanting very little to do with it, but feeling, you know, God pulling me back. And I'm just super grateful for that. I'm grateful for her husband when I said, hey, I think all religion is crap. I'm grateful for him not being rattled, right? And being like, well, no, you suck, Kai. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm glad for him kind of taking it in stride. And because there is a lot of anger and a lot of resentment that exists in the ex-Mormon community. And if you can't see that, well, you probably aren't really looking at these people and what they come out of the church with. So yeah, that's kind of what started to change me, and just the God working on my heart, people pastoring me and doing that. So
Well, that's really fascinating. You went and studied the Bible through with your son, so you were still doing your research. What's fascinating to me is that, you know, I think some ex-Mormons will hear your story and say you never completely disconnected yourself, in the sense you were still going to church every Sunday, you're reading the Bible. So they might be a little like, well, did he really completely leave this? He felt it was important that he go to church with his family. I'm just kind of telling you how, like, you know, an atheist would look at it. And again, I was an atheist for 13 years, so I know how to deconstruct faith and deconstruct other people's faith too pretty well. But so that's how they would see it. So, but I do feel like you did follow a lot of the same patterns that you see within the ex-Mormon community. And again, I'm friends with many people in the ex-Mormon community. Many of you have been on my program. I don't use this as a place to attack the church, nor do I use this as a place to attack the ex-Mormon community. I think you're all fellow image bearers, and God showed me early on, all fellow image bearers are accorded respect and dignity because they're created in his image. And that's really important that we get that across there. So Kai, so now I guess for a lot of people, when they decide they're going to start a YouTube channel or a podcast, a lot of it is, sometimes it's therapy. It's actually, sometimes this is my therapy sessions, is doing this. And I imagine, I guess, when did the idea, now, just to give you an idea, in 2005, John DeLynn is taking a walk, and then he hears a voice that says, you need to start a podcast. And he does not deny that he heard a voice. Now, there's some people in the TBM community think that the voice was a sinister voice, but there was a outside voice that called John to start a podcast. What made you decide to start a podcast? Did you hear a voice?
what's funny is I planned on doing a podcast that would be anti-Christian early
Didn't
on.
know that.
So, which is kind of a funny turn. Um, I what's interesting is I was not planning on the podcast being as therapeutic as it's been. That was never an intention, but I think just really putting it all out there and putting out why I felt the way that I felt has really, like, this is my thing for people who have left the church. Separate the parts that you really liked about being Mormon. And if you say it's nothing, I don't think that's true. I'm just gonna be honest. If you say it's all just this terrible, awful thing. I just don't think you're being that honest. Like, there are good people in the church. There are good systems in the church. I think that the local church, your bishops and your stake presidents are really trying hard to do a good job with whatever they have. Like, look at that and then say, what is the real problem? Like, that's really what this podcast has helped me to see. Like, what do I really feel is the problem? And that's where kind of the therapy, like, that's where the healing has come with like the people that I went to church with. Because I'm not angry with them. I'm not mad at the bishop who works a part-time job for free just so that he can help people. I'm not mad at that dude. Like, I'm not mad at my seminary teachers. I'm mad at the leadership that has said, hey, we can get away with this story until we're called on the carpet. And then the wreckage that causes and the ripple effect that causes for a whole generation of Mormons, a whole generation of millennial Mormons who are true believe. These are not fringe. These are not, hey, you got baptized at 8 because grandma really wanted you to. These are people who have served missions, married in the temple, done all of the stuff. Those people shouldn't leave. Like, I'm just being straight up. Those people should not leave the system unless the system is broken. And I don't know, that's kind of where this has been really helpful, is for me to identify, like, within the Mormon church, I actually, and I wouldn't say this when I was in faith crisis, I actually liked my relationship with God, right? I actually liked being connected to God. I you get what I'm saying, Steve?
Mhm.
Does any of that make sense?
No,
Like,
I tell people, I said, I don't, people don't realize that when you become an atheist, you lost your best friend, and it's devastating. So I completely understand exactly why you felt that lost sense of connectedness to the divine, and I completely understand, and that does resonate with me. So I want to, so for the podcast was therapeutic, which I'm really glad that it's been for you. It is surprising how that was not my expectation either. But I guess I want to know what made you decide to get your pastor involved in this, and then what did she have to say about that?
well,
You first.
is that for me? Okay.
It's for both.
Um, okay, so I'll just tell you, Steve, I am kind of a lone wolf type person. I do like to do things kind of my way. And after I got saved, I started to write a lot. Like, I started to write and write and write. And I actually had about 40 episodes written of this podcast that I was going to launch solo. I was not going to do it with anyone, because I really wanted to make sure that I was saying authentically what I didn't want to be censored at all. I just wanted to say exactly how I felt, and I didn't want to worry. I worry about offending people that I care about, and kind of getting anyone else involved in me being, nuclear. So so I decided that I was going to do it by myself. Dai's husband asked me to be on his podcast. It's called Pastors Unfiltered. Hey, they're getting a free plug here.
Shout out.
So he asked me to be on his podcast, and I was like, okay, sure. So I went on there and told, just a little bit of my story. I got maybe 10 minutes of time. And after we were done, after we, shut it down, he said, you know what, Kai, you should start a podcast. And I'd already had like 40 episodes written, which is pretty funny. And for those of you who say, I like to think that's God, hey, come on. But he said, you should start a podcast. And I'm like, yeah, I was kind of already planning that. And he's like, this is the thing. You should have my wife on. And my initial reaction as a lone wolf, always, when people are like, hey, we should do a business deal together, we should do this, my reaction is always no. It's just always, I'm going to do it my way. And before I said no, I said, well, Di is like incredibly talented. I mean, Di is really, um, listen, and I just said, this is a great opportunity to bring on someone who has, 30 years of experience, who is a great communicator, and who's a pastor that while I was in the Mormon church, I never really had any interactions with pastors. And if I did have, interactions, maybe they weren't as positive, like on my mission doing a Bible bash or something like that. So so there was this idea that like we could kind of mix these two worlds together, this ex-Mormon world and then this pro-Christianity world, which I don't know. They kind of seem like they might go like this. They might seem like they might clash heads, but I just think it's interesting to have that voice in there as a pastor, and so that's why I was before I said no, I said, "Gosh, let me think about that." And Di and I started this podcast together. Um, it looks like Di is having some
I'm
difficulty
still
here.
here. Still
Still
here.
here,
I think
that's fine.
Oh,
And
I think my
perfect.
camera battery died, so somebody's getting me another one.
okay, great. That's fine. And this happens all the time in our world. So that's all good. And it's not a problem. And Di, and actually, I'm sure you've been listening to this. So
Yeah.
your husband was the one that suggested that you be the co-host. And Kai, I think it's really interesting. All your life, like you said, you're a lone wolf. And then you have a pastor, somebody who's like an authority, kind of make a recommendation to you. And you initially, your first reaction was to say no, but you made a decision not to say no. And so what made you to finally decide, like, okay, I got 40 scripts written out. I got all these things planned. And I remember God, when I first starting this channel, God went to me, he said, don't make any plans. So, that's what God told me. So that everybody's gets the different messages, I know. But what's Di, I just want to hear from you. And again, we can hear you. We can't see you, but that's fine.
Right.
What has been the experience been like for you?
I think that I try to walk through open doors with an open heart and an open mind, and I certainly was willing to do that. I like Kai. Kai's a really likable person. I love Kai's story. I love his family. And, as I already mentioned, because I had such a close friend growing up who also really opened my conversation and my mind to, the Mormon church and beliefs, I really was open to the potential for having this conversation. And I've just said all along, I am Kai's ride along. I'm here for the journey. I'm here to provide reactions. I'm here to provide, there I am, to provide, I don't know, feedback, apologies, softening sometimes. Sometimes I don't soften. Sometimes I give a pretty fierce response to things.
Mm.
So I think we have a cool partnership. But mostly this is Kai's story, and I just want to be somebody who walks alongside and is a voice to I think people in the ex-Mormon space, that there is a way forward for you in a world of faith. And there are leaders. I'm a person of faith, but I'm a leader. And there are people like me who will be patient with you in the process. And I hope that would also, I'm pretty sure it is, but I hope that would be part of Kai's story too, that, the people that God placed in his path were patient with him. I mean, that's Brandon's story for sure. He was there to be patient and walk beside Kai through his frustrations and through his, anger and questions. And I want to embrace all kinds of people like that, not just in the ex-Mormon space. I don't know. Did I do okay with that?
That's awesome. That's great. I love it. And this other thing too is you're not only you're a co-host, but you're also a pastor and his pastor. So do you feel like this is his therapy sessions, but also do you feel like you're playing a pastoral role here for him too?
I don't know if I've ever thought of it that way. I think we have a good friendship, and I would like to believe that I would have that friendship with people of opposing beliefs even. I'm always willing to come to the table and have a conversation with somebody. I think if I were to put it this way, one of the things that drives most people, but I'll speak for myself, drives me crazy about the American political system is that to get ahead, I have to put down somebody else.
Yes.
And that's just not me. I don't believe, well, A, I don't believe I have to get ahead. B, I don't believe I have to help God get ahead.
Right.
But also, I don't have to put down other people to do that. I would rather meet people where they're at, be okay with where they're at. I think God is okay where people are at and that they're in process. And I'm okay with that too.
I love it. And that's the thing. I was actually talking to a pastor right before I got on the phone with you. I got lawnmowers going by, so I put my noise canceling headphones on. Is I told him, and one of the things I've always say is that, I don't think it's right in order to promote your faith that you tear down another person's faith.
Yeah.
And I said, and then I was talking about how like a lot of apologists do that. And I said, and then was talking to my pastor friend and said, really, because honestly, when you do that, you're more likely just going to create an atheist more than anything. If you feel that your religion can't stand on its own merits, that you have to destroy another person's faith, I don't think you're doing anybody any favors. So I appreciate the approach that you take there, Di. Kai, I am going to do the share screen here because I want us to give another promo and another shout out to Jesus for Mormons. And if you notice, folks, not only am I wearing the Jesus shirt, but I am wearing matching colors. That was very deliberate choice made today. So I've already seen, now we're up to 48 because I hopped on a little bit ago. And here is their YouTube channel. And they have a lot of stuff on here. And actually, when we get off, I'm going to actually ask you about a couple of these episodes that you've done. And then, of course, we've got the Facebook book group, Jesus for Mormons. So, folks, check out Jesus for Mormons. And Kai and Di, I love how your names rhyme. Kai, do you have any final words before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I want to say that I just feel that there is a connection that people can have with God outside of the church and outside of the Mormon church when they leave. I don't want to diminish how hard that is for anyone to leave. It was terribly hard for me. And I don't know. I pray for the people who leave, man. I pray that they'll be able to find some peace. And I've been able to find that through a relationship with Jesus. I've been able to find that through really trying to work point by point on every single hard feeling that I have and to forgive and to move on and to, just feel better about my time in the church and to try to see the most positive I can see out of it. And I'm grateful for people who have pastored me in that. I'm grateful for the Lord and softening my heart and making me, not so negative, not so nihilistic, not feeling like my life is worthless, like feeling like I have purpose, having all of those feelings. And I'm just grateful for that. I'm grateful to start to kind of get some peace in my life. When I had this really bad time of leaving faith, I'm glad that now I'm able to have some peace.
Well, Di, I find it interesting. I love it when outsiders come into different groups. You've entered into the Mormon podcast space. And I would just love to hear, as an outsider, what kind of observations you've made so far on this journey of yours.
I think there's been moments where I've been utterly shocked. We have an episode called Mormon Assets that particularly I'll point you to, where I had some moments of being really shocked. And but I hope that no one hears condemnation, but the genuine reaction is the genuine reaction of many people who haven't been in the Mormon faith and want to ask some serious questions about why is it done that way and what was someone thinking. So I think I provide like a little bit of objectivity. But I think if I were to add a final statement to that, we say at our church Venture all the time, Jesus is the hope of the world. And I think Kai and I want to be a voice of hope to people who might feel anger and hopelessness. So Jesus is still the hope of the world.
Amen to that. I really appreciate it. You're two very awesome human beings. I'm so glad we spent this time today to get to know each other a little better and have this great conversation, which I hope will be helpful and instructive to everybody, whether you're in the church, out of the church, an Evermo, whatever, whether you're an atheist, ex-Mormon, evangelical. We just want this to be a space where we can have these really important conversations, because these are the conversations that are part of this world. So, folks, I want to hear your comments and tell us what you think about it. I'm going to leave links to Kai's YouTube channel in the description. Also, send me a link to your church. Maybe, Di, you could, or just send me your website. I'll put the website of your church in Seattle there in the description as well. And just remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.